June 6, 1944. Private John Barnes crouched in his landing craft, heading toward Omaha Beach, watching Normandy coastline emerge through morning mist. Around him, 30 other soldiers sat silent, clutching rifles while cold seawater sprayed over the ramp. Channel crossing had been rough, with many soldiers seasick. Artillery shells whistled overhead as naval guns bombarded German positions. Aircraft roared above heading inland. Barnes had trained for months, but nothing prepared him for what awaited on the beach. Operation Overlord, Allied invasion of German-occupied France, was about to begin. Over 156,000 Allied soldiers would land on 5 beaches across 50 miles of Normandy coast in history's largest amphibious operation. First 24 hours would determine whether invasion succeeded or became catastrophic defeat. Planning for D-Day had consumed years. After France fell to Germany in June 1940, Britain stood alone fighting a defensive war. Soviet Union entered when Germany invaded in June 1941. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, United States joined. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin demanded that Britain and America open a second front in Western Europe to relieve pressure on Red Army fighting Germany in the east. However, mounting a cross-channel invasion required enormous preparation. Allies needed to build sufficient forces, develop specialized equipment, establish air superiority, and deceive Germany about invasion timing and location. General Dwight Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Commander of Allied Expeditionary Force in December 1943. Eisenhower had commanded Allied forces in North Africa and Italy, demonstrating ability to manage complex coalition operations. His deputy was British Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder. Ground forces would be commanded by General Bernard Montgomery. Naval forces were commanded by Admiral Bertram Ramsay. Air forces were commanded by Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory. This Anglo-American command structure required careful coordination between nations with different military cultures and priorities. Selection of Normandy as invasion site was strategic. Pas-de-Calais area was closest to Britain and offered shortest crossing, but was also most heavily defended and expected by Germans. Normandy offered adequate beaches for landing, was less defended, and provided access to Cherbourg port, which Allies needed for logistics. Normandy beaches were divided into 5 sectors. American forces would land on Utah and Omaha beaches on western end. British forces would land on Golden Sword beaches. Canadian forces would land on Juno Beach. Each beach had different terrain and defensive characteristics requiring tailored assault plans. German defensive system along French coast was called Atlantic Wall. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel commanded German forces defending northern France. Rommel believed invasion must be stopped on beaches because Allied air superiority would prevent German reinforcements from reaching coast. He ordered construction of extensive fortifications including concrete bunkers, artillery positions, machine gun nests, anti-tank obstacles, and millions of mines. Defenses were strongest at Pas-de-Calais, which Germans believed was most likely invasion point. Normandy defenses were substantial, but not as complete as Rommel desired. German forces in Normandy included static coastal divisions with limited mobility and several panzer divisions held in reserve. Allied deception operations were crucial to D-Day success. Operation Fortitude created fictional Allied army groups threatening Pas-de-Calais and Norway. Dummy equipment, fake radio traffic, and double agents convinced German intelligence that Patton commanded massive force in southeastern England, preparing to invade Pas-de-Calais. This deception succeeded brilliantly. Even after Normandy landings began, Hitler believed they were diversion and kept significant forces at Pas-de-Calais, expecting real invasion there. German panzer divisions that could have counterattacked Normandy beaches remained immobilized by Hitler's orders based on fortitude deception. Weather nearly caused D-Day cancellation. Eisenhower needed low tides at dawn to expose German beach obstacles, full moon for airborne operations, and calm seas for landing craft. These conditions occurred only few days per month. D-Day was scheduled for June 5th, but weather predictions showed storms making landing impossible. Eisenhower postponed 24 hours. On evening of June 5th, Chief Meteorologist, Group Captain James Stagg predicted brief window of improved weather on June 6th. Eisenhower made momentous decision to proceed. Invasion would launch despite marginal weather. Delay meant waiting weeks for next suitable tide conditions, during which time German intelligence might discover invasion preparations. Invasion began after midnight on June 6th with airborne operations. American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions dropped behind Utah Beach to secure causeway exits and prevent German reinforcements. British 6th Airborne Division dropped east of Sword Beach to capture bridges over Orne River and Caen Canal and destroy German artillery. Drops were chaotic. Strong winds and German anti-aircraft fire scattered paratroopers across wide areas. Many landed miles from objectives. Equipment was lost. Units became mixed. However, widespread drops confused German defenders who could not determine where main threats were. Small groups of paratroopers accomplished critical missions despite confusion. British airborne forces achieved early success capturing Pegasus Bridge over Caen Canal intact in coup de main operation. 6 gliders landed near bridge at 2 minutes after midnight. Troops rushed German guards securing bridge within minutes. Holding bridge prevented German counterattack from east and provided route for British forces advancing inland. Operation became legendary as example of precision airborne assault. Major John Howard led assault, and his force held bridge until relieved by British commandos advancing from Sword Beach. American paratroopers faced greater difficulties. Many landed in flooded areas behind Utah Beach and drowned in deep water. Others landed in hedgerow country, making navigation difficult. German defenders engaged scattered paratroopers throughout night. However, dispersed drops had unintended benefit. German commanders received reports of paratroopers everywhere, creating impression of massive airborne assault. This confusion delayed German response. Small groups of American paratroopers attacked German positions, disrupting communications and creating chaos in German rear areas. Naval bombardment began at dawn, with over 6,000 vessels offshore. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers fired thousands of shells at German coastal defenses. Bombardment was intended to destroy bunkers and neutralize artillery before landing craft reached beaches. However, bombardment effectiveness varied. At Omaha Beach, most bunkers survived because they were built into cliffs that naval guns could not hit at proper angle. At Utah Beach, bombardment was more effective because terrain allowed better targeting. At British beaches, bombardment lasted longer than at American beaches, providing better fire support. First landing waves hit beaches around 6:30 a.m. At Utah Beach, assault went relatively well. Landing force drifted south of intended point landing in lightly defended area. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., Assistant Division Commander of 4th Infantry Division, landed with first wave and made decision to proceed inland from actual landing point rather than move to original beach. His famous statement was that they would start war from where they were. This decision proved correct. Utah Beach had lightest casualties of all beaches, with fewer than 200 on D-Day. Omaha Beach became nightmare. Beach was dominated by high bluffs, providing German defenders perfect fields of fire. German positions survived naval bombardment. 352nd Infantry Division defending Omaha was better quality than intelligence had indicated. American landing craft faced rough seas, many swamped or struck mines. Duplex drive tanks that were supposed to support infantry sank in rough water. Infantry landed without armor support directly under German machine gun and artillery fire. First waves at Omaha suffered catastrophic casualties. Men exited landing craft into chest-deep water under intense fire. Many were hit before reaching shore. Bodies floated in surf. Wounded men struggled in water. Those who reached beach found themselves pinned down by fire from bunkers and pillboxes on bluffs. Engineers attempting to clear obstacles suffered heavy losses. Command and control collapsed. Radio communications failed. Officers were hit. Units mixed together. For several hours, situation appeared hopeless, with landing force unable to advance off beach. Omaha Beach came close to complete failure. General Omar Bradley, commanding American forces from USS Augusta, considered evacuating survivors and redirecting follow-on waves to Utah Beach. However, small groups of soldiers began infiltrating German defenses. Destroyers moved close to shore, providing direct fire support at point-blank range, despite risk of grounding. Navy Beach Battalion personnel and engineers cleared lanes through obstacles, allowing more craft to land. By mid-morning, troops began moving up draws and cliffs in small groups, attacking German positions from flanks and rear. German defense gradually crumbled as isolated bunkers were overwhelmed. By afternoon, American forces had secured tenuous hold on Omaha, though at terrible cost. Casualties exceeded 2,000, including over 400 confirmed losses. Gold Beach Landing by British 50th Infantry Division encountered strong resistance initially, but made steady progress. German defenses included fortified villages and concrete emplacements. British infantry, supported by specialized armor, including flail tanks for mine clearing and bridging tanks, advanced inland. By afternoon, British forces had penetrated several miles, capturing villages and linking with Canadian forces from Juno Beach. Juno Beach assault by Canadian 3rd Infantry Division faced rough seas that delayed landing and caused landing craft to hit rising tide when beach obstacles were submerged. Many craft struck mines, resulting in casualties. However, Canadian forces fought through German defenses, capturing fortified positions. Canadians advanced farther inland on D-Day than any other Allied force, though they did not reach D-Day objective of Caen. Fighting in French villages was intense with house-to-house combat. Sword Beach Landing by British 3rd Infantry Division aimed to capture Caen and link with airborne forces at Pegasus Bridge. Landing succeeded with British forces advancing inland, supported by armor. Commandos moving east linked with 6th Airborne Division, securing eastern flank. However, German 21st Panzer Division counterattacked in afternoon, threatening to reach beach and split British forces. British anti-tank guns and naval gunfire stopped counterattack, but prevented British forces from reaching Caen. Failure to capture Caen on D-Day would lead to weeks of fighting around the city. Rangers scaling cliffs at Pointe du Hoc accomplished one of D-Day's most dramatic missions. Intelligence indicated German artillery battery at Pointe du Hoc threatened both Utah and Omaha beaches. 2nd Ranger Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder, was assigned to scale 100-foot cliffs under fire and destroy guns. Rangers landed at base of cliffs under machine gun fire. Using rocket-fired grappling hooks and rope ladders, Rangers climbed cliffs while German defenders dropped grenades and cut ropes. Rangers reached cliff top and fought through trenches to gun positions only to discover guns had been moved. Rangers found guns hidden inland and destroyed them with thermite grenades. Rangers held their position for 2 days against German counterattacks until relieved. Casualties were severe, with over half Rangers becoming casualties. German response to invasion was confused and delayed. Many senior German commanders were away from posts on June 6th. Rommel had traveled to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday and meet Hitler. Army Group B headquarters did not learn of airborne drops until after 2 a.m. Scattered drops and deception operations created uncertainty about whether this was main invasion or diversion. German doctrine required armored reserves to counterattack any landing, but panzer divisions could not move without Hitler's authorization. Hitler was asleep, and his staff refused to wake him. By time Hitler authorized panzer movement in afternoon, Allied air superiority made daylight movement nearly impossible. German reinforcements attempting to reach Normandy suffered heavy casualties from Allied fighter-bomber attacks. Allied air forces dominated skies over Normandy. Over 13,000 Allied aircraft supported invasion, including fighters, bombers, and transport planes. Luftwaffe managed only 2 brief appearances over beaches during D-Day, with no significant impact. Allied fighters intercepted German aircraft, preventing attacks on landing fleet. Allied bombers struck German communications and transportation targets, preventing reinforcement movement. Air superiority that Eisenhower had insisted upon before approving invasion proved decisive. German ground forces could not maneuver effectively under constant air attack. Specialized armor developed for D-Day proved valuable, particularly at British beaches. Hobart's funnies included flail tanks for mine clearing, armored bulldozers, bridging tanks, and flame-throwing tanks. These vehicles allowed British forces to overcome obstacles and fortifications more quickly than American forces at Omaha, which lacked comparable equipment. Duplex-drive, amphibious tanks that sank at Omaha worked successfully at other beaches, providing armor support from landing phase. Engineering innovations reflected British experience and willingness to develop unconventional solutions to assault problems. Artificial harbors called mulberries were critical to invasion logistics. Allies could not rely on capturing ports intact because Germans would destroy facilities before surrendering. Mulberries were prefabricated harbors towed across Channel and assembled off Normandy beaches. 2 mulberries were constructed. American mulberry off Omaha was destroyed by storms in June, but British mulberry off Gold Beach functioned until November 1944. Mulberries, along with smaller pontoon piers, allowed supplies to flow directly across beaches until Cherbourg port was captured and restored. By end of D-Day, over 156,000 Allied troops had landed. Casualties totaled approximately 10,000, including over 4,000 confirmed losses. German casualties were estimated at 4,000 to 9,000. 5 beachheads were established, though none achieved full D-Day objectives. Most critical failure was not capturing Caen, which meant prolonged fighting in hedgerow country. However, invasion had succeeded. Allied forces were ashore, and reinforcements were arriving continuously. Second front that Stalin had demanded was finally open. German High Command recognized invasion was main effort by evening of June 6th. However, opportunity to destroy landing force on beaches had passed. German doctrine called for immediate counterattack to drive invaders back into sea before they could establish logistics and reinforcements. This required committing panzer divisions immediately. Delays in authorizing panzer movement and Allied air superiority meant counterattacks came piecemeal over subsequent days and weeks, rather than as overwhelming force on D-Day itself. German forces would fight skillfully in defensive battles, but could not prevent Allied buildup. French civilian population in Normandy suffered tremendously. Allied bombing and naval bombardment destroyed numerous towns and villages. Caen was devastated by bombing. Civilians were caught in combat zones, with thousands becoming casualties. Many lost homes and property. French resistance fighters assisted Allied forces by providing intelligence and conducting sabotage behind German lines. However, German reprisals for resistance activity were severe. Liberation of France came at high cost for French civilians, particularly in battle zones. Logistics of D-Day were extraordinary. Over 6,000 ships participated, including transports, landing craft, warships, and support vessels. Loading and organization of invasion fleet required months of planning. Each landing craft had specific cargo and destination. Timing had to coordinate arrivals at beaches with tactical plans. Naval engineers created detailed schedules managing thousands of vessel movements. Channel crossing in rough weather tested seamanship. Many sailors performed heroically, keeping landing craft operational despite damage and difficult conditions. Medical services faced overwhelming challenges. Casualties at Omaha Beach created crisis, as wounded accumulated on beach faster than they could be evacuated. Medics worked under fire treating wounded. Navy Beach Battalion personnel established casualty collection points. Landing craft returning to ships carried wounded. Hospital ships treated severe cases. Medical response saved thousands of lives, though many wounded suffered due to delays in treatment. Medical services learned valuable lessons about combat trauma and evacuation that improved care in subsequent operations. Follow-on waves after initial assault faced different challenges than first waves. German defensive fire decreased as positions were captured, but beaches remained dangerous from artillery fire and occasional air attack. Buildup of men and equipment on beaches created congestion. Beachmasters controlled traffic directing units inland. Engineers continuously worked to clear obstacles, remove mines, and improve beach exits. Organization required to transition from assault to sustained operations was complex, involving thousands of personnel managing logistics. Capture of Cherbourg became priority after D-Day. American forces advanced up Cotentin Peninsula against determined German resistance. German commander in Cherbourg, General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben, defended port with mixed garrison forces. American artillery and naval gunfire supported ground assault. Cherbourg fell on June 26, 1944, after week-long siege. However, Germans had thoroughly destroyed port facilities, requiring months of repair before Cherbourg could handle significant cargo. Delay in getting major port operational created logistics challenges for Allied forces throughout summer 1944. Battle of Normandy continued for months after D-Day. Allied forces fought through hedgerow country in brutal combat. German forces defended tenaciously, using terrain advantages. Fighting around Caen lasted until August. Operation Cobra, launched July 25th, achieved breakthrough, allowing American forces to break out from Normandy. German forces attempting to counterattack at Mortain in August were defeated. Falaise Pocket in August trapped significant German forces, resulting in catastrophic German losses. Paris was liberated August 25, 1944. Normandy campaign resulted in over 200,000 Allied casualties and over 400,000 German casualties. Campaign opened Western Europe to Allied advance that would culminate in German surrender May 1945. Strategic significance of D-Day extended beyond military victory. Successful invasion demonstrated Allied capability to conduct complex coalition operations. Coordination between American, British, and Canadian forces, with supporting French, Polish, and other contingents, showed that national differences could be overcome for common cause. Invasion vindicated Allied planning, and immense resources devoted to preparation. Most critically, D-Day opened Second Front, relieving pressure on Soviet forces and ensuring Germany faced war on multiple fronts that it could not sustain. Technological innovations developed for Overlord influenced post-war military doctrine. Amphibious assault techniques, specialized armor, airborne operations, and coordination of naval gunfire with ground operations became standard practices studied in military schools. Mulberry harbors demonstrated feasibility of bringing logistics directly across beaches. Scale of air-land-sea coordination established templates for joint operations. Modern amphibious warfare doctrine traces directly to lessons learned at Normandy. Memory of D-Day has remained powerful in Western historical consciousness. Invasion is remembered as moment when democracy confronted tyranny and prevailed. Sacrifice of soldiers who landed on hostile beaches under fire represents courage and determination that subsequent generations honor. Cemeteries at Normandy containing thousands of white crosses serve as solemn reminders of cost of victory. Surviving veterans have been celebrated as greatest generation who fought to preserve freedom. This memory has cultural and political significance beyond historical facts, shaping how Western societies understand their values and obligations. D-Day beaches today are peaceful with memorials and museums preserving memory. Omaha Beach, where bloodiest fighting occurred, is now quiet shore, where visitors walk reflecting on events of June 6, 1944. Cliffs at Pointe du Hoc remain scarred by shell craters. Pegasus Bridge has been preserved with original bridge, moved to museum. Towns of Normandy, rebuilt after destruction, now host ceremonies each June 6 honoring liberators. French gratitude for liberation remains genuine with American, British, and Canadian flags displayed alongside French tricolors. Personal stories of D-Day veterans illuminate human dimension of invasion. Many veterans struggled with trauma from combat experiences. Some never spoke about D-Day, feeling that describing horrors diminished those who did not return. Others felt obligation to share experiences, ensuring that sacrifice was not forgotten. Veterans' organizations maintained bonds formed in combat. As veterans aged and passed away, their testimony became increasingly precious historical record. Last surviving D-Day veterans are now in their 90s and early hundreds. Within years, all will have passed, leaving only written and recorded accounts. Debate among historians about D-Day focuses on whether invasion was necessary and whether it came too late. Soviet historians argued that Western allies delayed opening Second Front, allowing Soviet Union to bear brunt of fighting Germany. Western historians counter that invasion required enormous preparation, and premature attempt would have failed catastrophically. Timing allowed allies to accumulate sufficient forces and resources to ensure success. Delay also allowed Soviet forces to push German forces back from position of maximum strength. Whether D-Day could have come earlier without failing remains unanswerable, counterfactual. Assessment of D-Day leadership has evolved over decades. Eisenhower's decision to proceed, despite marginal weather, is generally praised as displaying judgment and courage. Montgomery's failure to capture Caen on D-Day led to criticism, though defenders argue that drawing German armor to British sector allowed American breakout. Bradley's performance at Omaha has been questioned, with some arguing he should have intervened more actively as situation deteriorated. American airborne operations chaos has been debated, with critics arguing better drop planning would have improved results, while supporters note that chaos confused German defenders. These debates will continue as historians analyze newly available documents and records. German perspective on D-Day reveals internal debates that weakened defensive effectiveness. Rommel wanted panzer divisions positioned near coast for immediate counterattack. Von Rundstedt preferred keeping panzers inland as mobile reserve. Hitler compromised, giving Rommel some forces near coast while keeping others under central control. This split meant insufficient forces were available in either location for decisive action. German intelligence failure to anticipate Normandy as main landing site despite months of Allied preparations remains significant intelligence breakdown. Success of Allied deception operations demonstrated that even experienced intelligence services can be misled by well-executed deception plans. Experience of individual soldiers reveals human reality behind strategic plans. Corporal Samuel Fuller landed on Omaha Beach with 1st Infantry Division. His unit's landing craft took direct hit from artillery before reaching shore. Fuller jumped into water that was over his head and struggled to shore, weighted down by equipment. He saw wounded men drowning, unable to remove heavy packs. Bodies floated everywhere. Beach was chaos, with men pinned down behind steel obstacles. Fuller and others finally moved forward in small rushes between German machine gun bursts. He reached seawall and waited for organized assault. Eventually, small groups infiltrated up draws, attacking bunkers from behind. Fuller survived D-Day, but carried psychological scars for life, describing Beach as vision of hell. British Private Bill Millen served as personal piper to Lord Lovat, commanding 1st Special Service Brigade landing on Sword Beach. Millen wore kilt and carried bagpipes playing as he waded ashore. Despite being conspicuous target, Millen survived and piped commandos inland to relieve paratroopers at Pegasus Bridge. German prisoners later said they did not shoot Millen because they thought he was insane. Millen's story became legendary as example of British eccentricity under fire. He continued piping throughout Normandy campaign and survived war, returning to Scotland where he lived until 2010. American Sergeant John Robert Slaughter landed on Omaha Beach with 29th Infantry Division. His landing craft struck mine before reaching shore. Slaughter made it to shore and took cover behind Shingle Bank. German fire was intense, with bullets striking all around. Slaughter saw friends hit. He felt overwhelming fear, wanting to hide, but officers pushed men forward. Slaughter's unit eventually breached German defenses after hours of desperate fighting. He described D-Day as longest day of his life, mixing terror, exhaustion, and grief for lost comrades. Slaughter later wrote detailed memoirs, ensuring that sacrifice of those who fell would be remembered. Naval personnel who manned landing craft showed equal courage to infantry they carried. Coxswains drove landing craft through rough seas under fire. Many craft were hit by artillery or struck mines. Crews kept craft operational despite damage. After unloading troops, craft returned through same gauntlet of fire to retrieve more troops. Coast Guard coxswains particularly distinguished themselves rescuing men from water after their craft sank. One coxswain made 11 trips to Omaha Beach, despite his craft being damaged multiple times. These men received little recognition compared to combat infantry, but were essential to invasion success. Rangers who fought at Omaha Beach beyond Pointe du Hoc conducted house-to-house fighting in Vierville Draw. Companies A and B of 5th Ranger Battalion landed on Dog Green sector directly in front of fortified exit. Companies were virtually annihilated in minutes, with casualty rates exceeding 90%. Few survivors joined other units fighting up draws. Ranger training emphasized initiative and small unit tactics, which proved valuable in confused fighting at Omaha, where chain of command broke down and junior leaders made critical decisions without orders. Engineering units performed essential but hazardous work. Navy combat demolition units and Army engineers were assigned to clear beach obstacles before rising tide submerged them. These units worked under intense fire, placing explosives on obstacles, while German machine guns targeted them specifically. Casualty rates among engineers were higher than infantry in initial waves. Despite losses, engineers cleared lanes through obstacles, allowing landing craft to beach. Without their sacrifice, Follow-on waves would have been unable to land and invasion might have failed. Artillery support on D-Day came primarily from naval guns rather than field artillery. Self-propelled guns landed with assault waves, but took time to position and begin firing. Naval destroyers provided critical fire support, particularly at Omaha, where destroyers steamed close to shore, firing directly at German bunkers. Destroyer crews risked grounding to get close enough for effective fire. This direct fire destroyed or suppressed German positions, allowing infantry to advance. Naval gunfire support continued throughout D-Day, with ships firing on call from ground forces. Logistical achievement of D-Day extended beyond combat operations. Quartermasters organized supply loads ensuring ammunition, food, medical supplies, and fuel landed in proper sequence. Signal corps established communications, allowing commanders to coordinate operations despite equipment losses. Military police controlled traffic on beaches and roads inland. Chaplains provided spiritual support to soldiers facing combat. Every military occupational specialty contributed to collective effort. Invasion succeeded because tens of thousands of support personnel performed their specialized roles effectively under difficult conditions. Weather on D-Day, though improved from June 5th, remained marginal. Seas were rough, causing landing craft to take on water. Clouds affected bomber accuracy, reducing effectiveness of pre-assault bombing. Weather affected German response as well. Rommel had returned to Germany partly because weather forecasts predicted conditions unsuitable for invasion. Many German units were conducting routine activities rather than maximum alert when paratroopers landed. Marginal weather that nearly caused postponement also contributed to achieving tactical surprise. Role of resistance fighters and intelligence networks provided invaluable support. French resistance reported German troop movements and defensive preparations. Dutch Paris network helped downed Allied airmen evade capture. Belgian resistance sabotaged railways, delaying German reinforcements. Norwegian resistance provided intelligence on German dispositions. Polish pilots flew combat missions supporting invasion. International coalition fighting Germany included combatants from dozens of nations united in defeating fascism. This global effort reflected war's ideological dimension as fight between democracy and dictatorship. Photographic and film documentation of D-Day created unprecedented visual record. Combat photographers landed with assault waves, capturing iconic images of soldiers wading ashore under fire. Robert Capa's photographs from Omaha Beach, though mostly lost due to darkroom accident, provided glimpse of chaos on beach. Film footage shot by military cameramen showed landing craft approaching shore and troops advancing across beaches. This documentation served both historical record and propaganda purposes, demonstrating Allied commitment and capability. Images have shaped public memory of D-Day, making invasion visually immediate for subsequent generations who see photographs and films rather than reading dry after-action reports. Experience of medics on D-Day was particularly harrowing. Combat medics treated wounded under fire on exposed beaches. They performed triage, deciding who could be saved with available resources. Many wounded required evacuation by sea, but rough conditions made loading casualties into boats difficult. Hospital ships offshore treated serious cases. Blood supply was inadequate for number of casualties, resulting in shortages. Medics improvised using whatever materials were available. Many wounded survived due to quick treatment, though others succumbed to wounds before evacuation. Medics who worked tirelessly to save lives deserve recognition equal to combat soldiers. Command relationships among Allied leaders were complex, with national pride and military doctrine sometimes creating friction. Montgomery's cautious approach frustrated American commanders who preferred aggressive action. American commanders resented Montgomery's authority as ground commander, feeling Americans provided majority of forces. British commanders worried about American inexperience in combat against Wehrmacht. Despite tensions, command structure functioned adequately with Eisenhower mediating disputes and maintaining Allied unity. Coalition warfare required compromises and patience from all sides. Ability to maintain coalition despite disagreements demonstrated political maturity and recognition that defeating Germany required cooperation. German prisoners captured on D-Day included many conscripts from occupied territories rather than German nationals. Ost battalions composed of Soviet prisoners of war who chose service over starvation manned defensive positions. Polish conscripts forced into Wehrmacht service surrendered willingly. These men had no enthusiasm for defending Hitler's Europe and often surrendered when opportunity arose. However, German units composed of committed soldiers fought tenaciously. Waffen-SS divisions that counterattacked proved formidable opponents despite Allied advantages. Variation in German defensive effectiveness reflected Wehrmacht composition by 1944, with quality units interspersed among lower-quality formations. Impact of D-Day on home fronts in Allied nations was immediate and profound. Radio broadcasts announced invasion beginning. Newspapers published extra editions with maps showing landing beaches. Civilians crowded churches praying for soldiers' safety. Families with sons and husbands in invasion forces waited anxiously for news. Collective experience of D-Day united Allied nations in shared hope and fear. When news arrived of successful landings, celebrations erupted, though tempered by knowledge of casualties. Home front support demonstrated that war was not just military operation, but societal effort requiring commitment from entire populations. Symbolic significance of Allied soldiers liberating Europe from Nazi occupation transcended military strategy. For Europeans who had endured years of German occupation, Allied landings represented hope that tyranny would end. Underground resistance networks that had fought Germans for years saw Allied invasion as vindication of their sacrifices. Jews surviving in hiding or camps learned that forces dedicated to defeating Hitler were advancing. Moral dimension of D-Day as fight against evil regime gave invasion meaning beyond territorial objectives. This ethical framework shaped post-war memory, portraying D-Day as righteous crusade. Technological legacy of D-Day influenced Cold War military development. Amphibious assault techniques refined at Normandy were applied in Pacific theater and later conflicts. Specialized armor and engineering vehicles became standard in Western militaries. Coordination between air forces and ground forces established patterns used in subsequent wars. Logistics systems developed to sustain invasion across water informed maritime prepositioning and rapid deployment forces. Modern amphibious capabilities trace lineage directly to innovations tested on June 6, 1944. Failure to achieve all D-Day objectives, particularly capturing Caen, meant Allied forces faced longer Normandy campaign than planned. Hedgerow fighting that followed was costly attritional warfare. Allied casualties mounted in battles for villages and fields. Critics argue that better planning or execution could have achieved breakthrough more quickly. Defenders note that German forces fought skillfully in defensive terrain, and that methodical approach minimized casualties compared to frontal assaults. Debate reflects larger questions about whether caution or aggression produces better results in warfare. Comparison between D-Day and other amphibious operations shows Normandy's unique scale. Pacific theater saw numerous amphibious assaults, including Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Philippines, and Okinawa. These operations refined techniques but involved smaller forces than Normandy. Sicily and Italy landings in 1943 provided experience but faced less organized resistance than Normandy. Gallipoli in First World War demonstrated catastrophic consequences of failed amphibious assault. Normandy's success proved that properly planned and resourced amphibious operation could succeed against defended coast, establishing beachhead for sustained offensive. Legacy of D-Day veterans includes not just military victory, but example of civic virtue. Many veterans returned to civilian life without seeking recognition, simply resuming normal lives. They worked, raised families, and contributed to communities. Their service represented duty fulfilled, rather than basis for lifelong identity. This quiet heroism embodied values they fought to preserve. As veterans aged, many became willing to share experiences, ensuring younger generations understood cost of freedom. Veterans' participation in commemorative ceremonies educated public about history. Veterans' legacy includes both military accomplishment and post-war example of citizenship. Operation Overlord succeeded because Allied nations dedicated vast resources. Thousands of personnel planned meticulously. Soldiers displayed courage under fire, and fortune favored attempt. First 24 hours of June 6, 1944, saw over 156,000 soldiers land on hostile shores. Thousands became casualties. But by nightfall, Allied forces held 5 beachheads in France. Invasion that Hitler declared would be thrown back into sea had succeeded. Path to liberating Europe and defeating Nazi Germany was open. Sacrifice of D-Day ensured that tyranny would not prevail and that subsequent generations would inherit world where freedom had been defended at tremendous cost. That sacrifice deserves perpetual remembrance and gratitude. Individual acts of heroism on D-Day numbered in thousands. Medics who treated wounded while exposed to fire saved countless lives. Engineers who cleared obstacles knowing they were primary targets enabled invasion success. Coxswains, who made multiple trips under fire, delivered troops despite personal danger. Infantry squad leaders who led attacks up cliffs and through obstacles demonstrated initiative when command structure collapsed. Each soldier who overcame fear to advance contributed to collective victory. D-Day succeeded not through brilliant strategy alone, but through courage of thousands of individual soldiers who did their duty despite terror. Post-war reconciliation between former enemies began surprisingly quickly. German veterans and Allied veterans eventually met at Normandy commemoration ceremonies, sharing experiences despite having fought each other. Former enemies acknowledged mutual respect for soldiers who fought bravely regardless of side. This reconciliation reflected larger process of European integration, where former adversaries became allies. D-Day memory evolved from celebration of military victory to reflection on war's costs and commitment to preventing future conflicts. Normandy became symbol not just of Allied triumph, but of peace achieved through sacrifice,